Hey everyone, this is the Shadow Ranger. I got into a discussion about a topic with the host of a wrestling radio show that I like to listen to, Wrestling News Live. It's a very great show, and if you're not listening to the show, I encourage you all to take a listen. You'll hear me have a debate with one of the hosts about TNA. I love TNA. He hates it. We got into an argument. But I want to speak about something that I brought up in my conversation with the host of this show and elaborate on it here. I will put the link to the show's website in the description bar. Something that I realized that wrestling companies, mainly WWE and TNA, and other wrestling companies may make the same mistake. Wrestling companies are not allotting for, not allotting, that might not be the right word. Wrestling fans fail to prepare for the stupidity of wrestling fans. And what I mean when I say this is wrestling fans tend to be a little closed-minded with things. And I think that wrestling companies fail to prepare for the fact that wrestling fans will sometimes be closed-minded. And the topic I mentioned on this show, and I'm going to bring up as an example here, is the Immortal faction in TNA. I like that they formed a faction. I have very few problems with it. But an issue that I see where TNA failed to plan was they failed to plan for the closed-mindedness of fans. They failed to account for the fact that many fans were going to take one look at Immortal, see Hogan and Bischoff in the group, and just write it off as an NWO ripoff, which it is not. How many of you, anyone who sees this video, how many of you can say that you have actually given Immortal a fair chance? That you didn't go in with a closed mind, you didn't go in looking for something to complain about, that you didn't just see Hogan and Bischoff and just say, oh, Hogan and Bischoff, it's an NWO ripoff? How many of you can say that you actually watched Impact, watched the show, watched what the Immortal faction did, and then actually gave it a fair evaluation? Or were you like many others who just saw it's a big group, Hogan and Bischoff in it, so it's an NWO ripoff? That's what I think TNA failed to plan for in forming this group. Somebody on that creative team, maybe someone said and they got ignored. If so, it was a mistake to ignore them. But at some point, someone should have stopped and brought up the fact that wrestling fans are closed-minded. They're going to see us do this group. They're going to take one look at this group and just say NWO ripoff and never give it a chance. They needed to do something when they started the Immortal faction. Something that said, this is not the NWO. Because the NWO was such a successful faction that every faction that's worth a damn since then has been compared to the NWO. Every faction gets compared to two factions. There's two factions that are the measuring stick: the NWO and the Four Horsemen. Every faction that has ever been worth a damn has been compared to those two factions. That's who they compare you to. And why I feel TNA failed again is that they needed to do something at the very beginning. And maybe it's not too late because the faction's only been around for about a month and a half. Maybe it's not too late to do so. But they need to do something. Something big, something significant that says, this is not the NWO. And that's a problem that's going to come up in the future whenever anyone tries to do a faction. You have to do something. Wrestling companies going forward have to do something whenever they start a new faction that establishes that, hey, this ain't ripping off the Horsemen, this ain't an NWO ripoff. I mean, you talk about a faction being like the NWO. I've said before, Nexus is way more like the NWO, and one of the hosts on the show agreed with me. But I think that's what worked with Nexus. Nexus is so much like the NWO, but they did something right off the bat that says this is not the NWO. And that was what they won the Slammy for tonight, the original Nexus attack. That was the moment that they did something right from the beginning to send the message, this ain't the NWO. And that's why Nexus doesn't get compared to the NWO that much, even though they're way more like the NWO than Immortal is. If you actually just take the groups, Immortal, Nexus, compare each group to the NWO, Nexus is way more like the NWO than Immortal is. But the reason that Nexus isn't constantly bashed for being an NWO ripoff is because from the moment they started Nexus, even as much like the NWO the Nexus is, they did something big from the beginning to send the clear message, this is not the NWO. And that was that original attack. If they hadn't done that original attack from the beginning, people would be calling them NWO ripoffs. They would just saw this group of dudes, they're talking about taking over, they all got t-shirts, people join in and wear the shirts. You know, it started with the NXT Season 1 rookies, then a couple of Season 2 rookies joined in, they kicked the guy out. It would have been called NWO. That original Nexus attack, where they showed up out of nowhere, they destroyed everybody, they beat the holy crap out of John Cena. That was their moment of saying, that was the whole point of that segment, of that debut. To say, this is not the NWO. That's where WWE succeeded with the Nexus and why it doesn't get compared. And that's where TNA failed with Immortal and why it gets the NWO comparisons. So that's all I really have to say on this topic. Feedback would be appreciated. Follow me on Twitter. If you like my videos, subscribe, tell more people about them so I can get my views up. Thank you very much. Have a nice night.